Now, with Israel's relentless bombardment, hopes for an improved humanitarian situation in Gaza remains faded. Aid agencies are lamenting Israel's operation while conveying about the extreme crisis in Gaza. WHO chief made strong remarks in the United Nations on Friday. He said nowhere and no one is safe in Gaza as of now. He said that half of Gaza's hospitals and two-thirds of its primary healthcare centers are not functioning, and that lack of fuel has brought healthcare systems as being on its knees. WHO has verified more than 250 attacks on healthcare in Gaza and West Bank, and on an average, a child is killed every minute in the enclave.
On average, a child is killed every 10 minutes in Gaza. 1.5 million people have been displaced and are looking for shelter anywhere they can find it, but nowhere and no one is safe.
The Director General of the Palestine Red Crescent Society told the UN Security Council that the concern for civilian life has now shifted to survivability of the sick and wounded.
Prohibition on fuel continues, we will not be able to continue to receive this aid and distribute it. Furthermore, if no aid gets to the north of Gaza Strip, we will soon see infants dying because their mothers cannot feed them. Many people will starve and die of diseases.
Meanwhile, UN says 100 of its workers have been killed since the war began, and this is the highest death toll for UN in such a short span. And to mourn the victims, UN staff around the world will observe a minute of silence on Monday. UN officials are now criticizing Israel's proposal to implement a daily 4-hour humanitarian pause in military operations. And the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Palestine has described it as highly cynical and inhumane. She said, with continuous bombing, there won't be any way back in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, more than 1,000 officials in the U.S. Agency for International Development have signed an open letter urging the Biden administration to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And Biden administration has clarified that there is no scope of a formal ceasefire yet in the fighting. Now, to help us understand more about the Gaza crisis, we are being joined by Alan Burstein, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science, University of California. He's joining us live from California. Welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Burstein.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to begin by asking you that as calls for ceasefire grows louder, pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu increases, but Netanyahu rules out ceasefire. And according to the latest reports, he even rejects ceasefire for hostages deal in Gaza. So what happens now to the hostages who have been held captive for over a month now?
So there's all kinds of rumors every day surfacing regarding possible deals that are going to happen with the hostages. Some say that Israel will agree to a 3-day pause in the fighting in exchange for a certain amount of hostages. Others say that Israel is going to agree to release Palestinian women and minors in Israeli jails in exchange for the women and minors that were kidnapped on October 7th. All that is in the realm of speculation. Right now, Israel's continuing the war and saying it's not going to accept the ceasefire, primarily because most of Israel's previous rounds with Hamas in the last 16 years have all ended with these ceasefires that quite literally blew up in Israel's face on October 7th. So that's the reason that Netanyahu, and I think that he's convinced President Biden, is saying unequivocally Israel will not agree to a ceasefire. It may agree to these limited pauses in order to say it is doing something humanitarian, but it's not going to accept the ceasefire without completing its mission, whatever that completion may be.
Sure, and also talking about, the increasing pressure, clearly, that's building on Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right now. Even Emmanuel Macron slams Israel for killing civilians. And, this level of humanitarian catastrophe as bombing, the latest near Al-Shifa, and thousands being displaced in Gaza continues. And, a claim by WHO says that nearly 10 children are killed every hour. The suffering seems unending as Netanyahu continues to take tough line and civilians continue losing life, family, homes. What is going to be the end game here?
The situation in Gaza is one of the biggest humanitarian catastrophes that there are. There are over 1.4 million internally displaced people, and the amount of people that have died, both on Israel's side and on the Palestinian side, in the last month is greater than the amount of Palestinians and Israelis that died in the 30 years that included both the first Intifada and second Intifada. The amount of devastation in the Gaza Strip, we could go on and on, is simply endless. As far as Netanyahu is concerned, he is trying to suggest that Israel is not going to stop until Hamas is destroyed. Now, there is no real explanation of what that means. Hamas includes an entire bureaucracy, an entire administration, includes thousands of fighters. So then the rhetoric started to change, and he started to talk about possibly destroying Hamas's military capabilities, its ability to govern. But as far as Netanyahu is concerned, he is trying to show that it's not going to be another Israeli incursion and then Israeli pullback, but that the situation will continue no matter what, and that the loss of civilian lives, tragic as it may be, is a price that Netanyahu, as far as he's concerned, has to be paid. The world has to pay in order to end the situation that occurred, that led to October 7th. Now, as you accurately pointed out, the world is getting tired of Netanyahu's stalling tactics, because it's constantly saying that Israel is doing everything it can, but is going to need more time, is going to need more time. The world, Macron, also we see the impatience growing in the United States. We see tomorrow there's a summit of Arab states in Riyadh, and on Sunday a summit of Islamic states. These are all putting pressure on the United States. We see that there's growing international pressure. However, also we have to remember that internally, Netanyahu has a very right-wing government that is pressuring him from the other side, saying, you don't bow down to international pressure, you have to continue going no matter what. And Netanyahu, I would argue, is probably more worried about his own internal government falling apart, and that's the reason he's saying, with all the international pressure, he's just going to keep going.
Yeah, and as public anger and demands that Israel prioritize hostage negotiations increase, the situation only seems to get dire and more dire from here. Thank you so much, Mr. Burstein, for joining us and giving us all those insights.
Thank you. Have a good day.